Hello, my name's Patrick Jamieson, and I'm going to give you a brief tour of the FHIR Object Model. But before we dive into the code, I thought it would be helpful to set the stage. If you're a FHIR developer, you've already come to experience how complex working with FHIR data is. There are lots of data structures, over 700 resources and their supporting elements. And they're structured in various ways that are defined by the FHIR standard. Remembering the names, relationships, and specific requirements is absolutely a cognitive burden. FHIR is a directed graph, so you're going to see that FHIR resources have nested elements, collections, and some intricate relationships. For example, there can be links from one resource type to another. Navigating and manipulating these structures can be challenging. So, for example, a patient resource shown here has a body in JSON with a lot of different elements that have even sub-elements that can consist of arrays and other objects, and links to other resources. When you look at a typical patient, you'll see that these linkages go out to things like medications, observations, conditions, etc. So it can be very complex to navigate and especially do this programmatically. So what's the problem? Well, currently, when you use FHIR with InterSystems Iris for health, you're loading data as JSON documents into a class called Dynamic Abstract Object. The problem there is that there's no way for you to use dynamic abstract objects to really understand and navigate FHIR structures. There's no guidance from the IDE, no type safety, no context, sensitive documentation that you could find in Visual Studio Code or debugging support. So we came up with a solution to create FHIR classes. These classes take these dynamic abstract objects, and using our FHIR Object Model Generator, we generate corresponding classes in Iris for Health, as you can see here. This offers us approach with the generator to stay in sync with changes in the FHIR standard. So, for example, it will not be difficult to generate a set of classes for FHIR R5. So we have 1,079 classes generated for R4, as you can see here. This is found entirely in the 2024.1 release. The key base class for all of these FHIR model classes is abstract set. So there's a common set of operations such as get, put, remove, apply, and you could convert from dynamic abstract objects to class objects and back again. And we'll see this in code in just a little bit. You could also add and iterate over abstract sets. All of the generated FHIR model classes generate or implement the abstract set interface. So here's how you would, for example, access data. If we wanted to get a patient name, which in FHIR is an array of objects, we would navigate to the patient name and get the first element of that array using get0. And then if we wanted to get specific things, for example, let's say we wanted to get the identifier at the first position, we could get the value, or for example, address, we can get the city. We could also update using the put operation. So this example here, we're going to change the use of the name to the official, and we could update existing values. For example, observation will go from status, we'll put the status to final. Now I'm going to show you this in code. We could convert any object from dynamic abstract object to a specific resource type. So for example, if we know the resource type of the dynamic abstract object shown here, we could convert that using the from-DAO method as shown here. And so this would be iris for health, FHIR for, and then the resource type patient, for example. And we could then also load data from dynamic abstract objects to class data for HS FHIR model R4 patient. So dynamic objects is high speed, but we could basically then convert these to classes that you could use for manipulating these objects. And we could export data just by going from our model class to dynamic abstract objects, and we could also convert that to JSON. Now that I've set the stage, let's see how we can manipulate some FHIR resources in a bundle using our FHIR object model definitions. I've written some sample code here. Let's run it in debug so we could see each step as we go through this. I'll hit the debug method. You can see we could debug this. I'm going to go through it step by step. I'm getting a dynamic bundle, which is a number of FHIR resources. And I'm going to convert this bundle into a FHIR object model of the same type, a bundle class. And you can see that here, HS FHIR model R4 bundle. Now I also can query the resource entries in this bundle using the abstract set query engine. And let's see how that would work. I'm going to go through that, and what I'm going to do is start at the root node. That's what $ indicates, and I'm going to go through all of the elements of the bundle looking just for resources. So when I do that, I get a list, and you could see this is a dynamic array, and we have 5 entries in this dynamic array. They are all FHIR resource types. So at this point, I'd like to convert those to a corresponding class, object model class. So I'm going to iterate over that because it is a dynamic array. I could just use an iterator. And I'm going to get the next value. I find the resource type. Just continue on. You can see the resource type is patient. Now I could convert that resource to a FHIR object model of the same kind. So I'll do that. And you can see here we have an HS FHIR model R4 patient. And we can see the properties in it. It doesn't have its active field set. We can see the address, birth date, etc. All of the properties of the patient object. Now let's say I wanted to transform part of this patient, and I'll pass in a FHIR model, the FHIR model resource I just created. And let's look at this. First of all, I'm going to check, is it truly a patient object? Well, we could use the %isa. And in this case, we'll see we did find a FHIR object. Now we could take the property and we could use the set method and set this to active. We'll return 1. So we converted this patient, and now we could convert this patient object back to a dynamic abstract object if we so want. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use the toDAO method that we talked about earlier. And you're going to see over here we have a dynamic object. And we could then also take this toDAO object, dynamic object, and we could write the toJSON method. And let's see what we get. We're going to write that, and we could see over here we've already seen we've created the JSON. But let's see, take a look at what this looks like, and you can see now we have all of the values, including the fact that we've just set the active value of this resource to active. So that's just one example. Now let's see another example. Here I'm going to create a patient object instance. In this case, I'm going to use this class method I wrote where I'm going to pass in the identifier and create a patient from scratch. So again, let's put this into debug, and I'll enter the identifier 1, 2, 3. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a new model class. And let's see what that looks like over here in the debugger. I could see all the FHIR elements for that class. That's great. I'm on the right track. Now I want to include the name. I know name is an object, and actually in FHIR it's an array of objects. So I'm going to include the name, and then I'm going to make an entry. So let's see what that looks like. Now if I go to the patient and I look at the human name, notice I'm seeing that I have all the properties of that name because I've made a object entry for it, and I could set its various properties. So I'm going to set the first name to John here, but John itself is for names is part of an array of given names. So I'm going to add that into that array. I'm going to set the family name, and I'm going to then add the name to the patient object. So let's see what we have here. If we look at patient now, we see we have a name, and we have a list here of names because there can be a list of names in FHIR of human names. The family name is set to Doe, and the given name is John. So and John is part of this array of first names. So we've set all of that correctly. Now can we use our functions to understand better what we've already done? Well, here we're going to get the first entry of name and see if it contains the value or the element of family. It should, and so that example family name, if we get it properly, it should be Doe. So let's take a look at that. And we see that the example family name is indeed Doe. Now what if we want to change the type of name, in this case the use of it, we want to change it to official. Well, here's what the syntax would be. We would get the first value of that name array, and we're going to put, using a put, we're going to put use is equal to official. And again, we could expand this to see if that indeed happened, and you could see we have use equal official. Changing the gender is, or setting the gender is very easy. Here's another example with an address. What we want to do is include that object. We want it, address can be, again, an array of addresses, so we'll make an entry. We'll include lines, which also is an array. So we'll set the line equal to 1 and add it. And now we got the address city, the address state, postal code, and we'll add that back to patient. So let's see if we got that that happened here. And we could see under patient, we'll look for address, and we see we have the sequence of addresses. And we expand this, and we could see again that we have a HS FHIR model R4 address. I'm going to include the identifier I had earlier. And again, I'm going to make an entry, and this time I'm using a special function called make coding because it's a codable concept, and I'm using the HL7OR code system terminology here. I'm going to set the value of the ID and the type, add that to the array, and now I'm going to convert this FHIR model object to a dynamic abstract object. I'm going to go in the reverse direction. So I'm going to create the patient dynamic abstract object, and now I'll just get the JSON representation of that so you could see it. And what you could see here, we're already seeing that in the debugger, and I'll just write that out. and you could see this, and you could post this back to the FHIR server. So this kind of gives you a feeling for how you'll use FHIR Object Model Classes. They're very helpful for example, transforming FHIR from one representation to another, or building a FHIR facade. I hope you enjoyed this, and stay tuned for other FHIR videos. Thanks.